Welcome to the HR Uprising podcast. This highly practical podcast series explores HR and management hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Brought to you by Actus software, our aim is to build a better workplace for people. The HR Uprising is about collaborating and supporting each other to build the confidence and skills to rise up to each challenge and deliver real, lasting business value. You can find out more at hruprising.com or join our LinkedIn community. Now introducing your host, chartered psychologist, best-selling author, entrepreneur and speaker, Lucinda Carney.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast episode. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney, and this week we are talking all about mediation. I'm really delighted that I've got Pete Colby of Pragmatism, Pragmatism UK Limited with me, who's going to enlighten us about, when we've used mediation. I actually don't know very much about it at all. So I'm really interested to have this conversation with you, Pete. Thank you so much for joining us on the HR Uprising. Would you like to introduce yourself, perhaps? Give us a bit of your background.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you very much for the invite. It's great to have this chance to talk to you, Lucinda. My background is I'm 52 years old, so I've got a lot of background. But just to very briefly summarise it, it's mainly HR. So I did HR mainly in manufacturing in organisations such as British Steel, then in the food industry for Northern Foods, and then latterly in aerospace for Rolls-Royce. I left corporate life at the end of 2018, and since then I've been running my own business, mainly focus on mediation. So doing mediations and training mediators, they're the two main things that the business
did you do mediation in your career as an HR professional?
Yes, I first trained as a mediator in 1996, which is, okay. I only realised the other day is 25 years ago. So yeah, time flies. Yeah. So yes, I first attended a mediation training course then, and then just have always practiced it, and I've always had an inherent dislike of formal grievances. So that's what's driven me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So can you help me understand? Because I've probably got lots of assumptions, but and I can see that certainly those you had quite heavily unionised businesses that you were working with. Is that a thread? Is that particularly relevant, or is mediation in different businesses?
It's relevant in terms of it can be used in unionised environments, but it's just as relevant in non-unionised environments. So if I think about the range of issues that I've mediated, it's been everything from two business owners, and they were the only two employees, obviously no unions, through to national union strikes. So it's, yes, the unions play a part and usually are quite positive about mediation, because if you get the right trade unions, then they're keen to resolve issues without formal processes and without formal grievances, etc., because they don't really enjoy them either.
So how does mediation fit in? You've mentioned grievances twice then. So when would a mediator be brought into a situation?
So in practice, normally somebody will contact somebody like myself after an employee's raised a grievance, and then they've appealed that grievance outcome, and then probably somebody else has put a counter grievance in against them, and they're looking at tribunals. That's normally when somebody will say, oh, well, maybe we should try mediation. The more effective way of doing things is to try mediation before you get into any of those processes, because one thing that many people don't realize about mediation is it's not instead of, it's as well as. But the aim of mediation is that all parties involved feel that they then don't need to go down formal grievance processes, employment tribunals, etc. So that's what the aim of mediation is. And mediation is not rocket science in its principle. It's just really getting in the middle of an issue, usually between two people, often between teams, sometimes between companies and trade unions. Whatever the issue is, it's just getting into the middle of of that issue, which is what mediation's all about.
So before I ask a bit more about what it is, so I can see, so basically there's a conflict or a disagreement within the workplace, and it's not easy to resolve, and so mediation would be engaged. Would typically HR, because you've been in both hats, would typically HR have that hat on prior, or is there an obvious point at which you go to mediation?
Very often it's HR. It doesn't need to be HR, and I suppose we're talking two different things here. Where we're talking about mediation as in external professional mediators like myself. I do workplace, civil and commercial mediation. It's not just workplace. So you go into an outside body because things have got so bad. You need somebody external to look at this. But if you look at mediation, if we do it the right way, the way that I think organizations should do it, actually it's somebody internal who's got the skill set, which is often HR professionals, but sometimes some managers, or even not managers, sometimes even trade union reps, they can make good mediators, because it's not about the qualifications that you've got. It's sometimes about the experience, but it's about the approach you've got. And what mediation is, I always say to people, all it is facilitating people to have honest conversations. So when I trained as a mediator in British Steel, for example, I already had in my mind, I used to sit in formal grievances, and I used to see that the first stage always said we should try to resolve it informally. But I used to see that didn't happen. And I used to hate taking notes in grievances and things. It was awful. But I always used to see that the outcome was, well, we've upheld the grievance, or we haven't, or we've partially upheld it, but the actual issue still remained. And that's when people were starting to look at mediation, etc., and calling in external people like myself. But as soon as I trained as a mediator, an internal mediator, that then gave me a different mindset. And it almost gave me just the confidence to know that I've got the tools and techniques that I can get in the middle of this issue in that informal process and see if I can help these people to resolve the issue. And what I found was, on most occasions, that happened. On the few occasions that it didn't happen, people then just went back to where they were. They could raise a formal grievance. But I always saw that then as a failure on my part. It sort of hit me in my heart to say I couldn't resolve that. But what I was then heartened by was, if the people through the formal grievance process, they couldn't come up with a solution either. Like, well, I've done all I could then. And sometimes then they will call in an external mediator who might have just a wider perspective and a more independent view, etc. But, mediation is known. I mean, I tend to monitor sort of stats and things like that, because, we call it success rate, but I don't think that's the right terminology. But it's over 90% of mediations that result in an amicable mutual outcome. Now, sometimes, don't get me wrong, those amicable mutual outcomes are separation and not repairing the relationship. And I suppose that's where, as an external mediator, I can have those real conversations, and it's more difficult for an internal person to have those. But again, we can all have without prejudice conversations in disputes, etc. But yeah, that's what it's all about for me, is avoiding these formal processes, because I just think we waste so much time, money, but more importantly, cause so much stress that we could avoid. And it's not just for the parties, it's for the HR people as well that are involved, and the managers that are involved, etc.
Yeah, the pain and stress involved in formal processes. So it's kind of issue resolution. Sounds a bit like marriage guidance in organisations, just preventing things where people have to go sue each other to pay the lawyers to things, right? It's
well, exactly. And I always say, in mediation, no party should feel like they've won, because if they do, one party feels like they've lost.
Yeah.
But when things go all the way, whoever wins in court, there's only ever one winner, and two, the lawyers on each side.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I work with a lot of lawyers, and most lawyers nowadays are great lawyers. They are wanting to help their clients to resolve issues as early as possible. The bad lawyers don't. They want them to go all the way, so they maximize their fees. But most lawyers are good, and to get that advice through lawyers and things is also really important. Which is why I work very closely with quite a few lawyers, both employment and commercial.
So I'm really interested to understand a bit about what you do in terms of mediation. But I suppose before we go there, then just tell me how would you get engaged? Because you're independent, so I can understand you'd get engaged. You probably had a day job when you were in an organisation, then you'd be brought in as and when. Is it the same way when you're independent, or why would people engage you? And you also said you have a range of reasons to be engaged. You're civil.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose it's a separate conversation in that I'll do commercial contractual disputes, and I'll do civil, so if there's two neighbours falling out or landlord tenants, things like that, I'll mediate those disputes as well. But workplace employment mediation is a specific leg of mediation, and it's more where I specialise, to be honest. And why would I get engaged? It would normally be that either a HR professional or a manager in the organisation would say, they know of me, or they're out there looking for a mediator because they can't resolve the issues internally. And as I say, usually it's already gone through the grievance process. And they're wanting to try to reach a solution. So they call an external mediator in. The point I always make to people, because once we get to a resolution and people are like, oh, that's great, I always talk to people about root cause, and usually probably on, I don't know, I'm guessing, but 7 or 8 out of 10 mediations, people say, oh, I wish I'd have had that conversation a year ago and we could have nipped this in the bud. And then that's the conversation I'm having with them about, okay, you might not currently have the confidence to have got in the middle of that issue, but a year ago it was less of an issue. And if you'd have had that confidence and, maybe a few of the skills to do that, actually you could have just got in the middle of those two people, facilitated that conversation, and it wouldn't have escalated as far as it did. So, it very much is about that confidence thing. And when I was back in British Steel as a fairly not junior, but, my first HR manager's job, I didn't have that confidence because I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And, things are hard when you don't know how to do them. They're a bit easier when you do.
So what do you do then? What are the skills that you bring to this? You say it's kind of common sense, but I mean, you were trained to do. What do you do?
So the things that enable you to be a good mediator are not being a black and white sort of policy driven type of person, and putting those to one side and being able to listen to people and to understand them. So the role of a mediator is very much not a judge. It's very much a facilitator. So sometimes people will come to a resolution between them that I think, wow, if that was me, that wouldn't be my ideal solution, but it's not me.
All that matters is it looks like it's a good one for them.
Yeah, if it works for them, it works for them. Now, what I do is test their thinking. I always play a little bit of devil's advocate, and what I say to them is metaphorically prod and poke a little bit, because you want to test that their resolution is a good, sound resolution. And I always say to people, the one thing you can guarantee in life is that something else will go wrong. So part of the conversation is, if and when this goes wrong again, or you look at the other person in the wrong way, or they perceive that that's happened, or read an email the wrong way, whatever, how are you going to deal with that? Because what you don't want is, well, we're going to go back to where we are and we're going to go down grievance process and things. It's usually more about communication and how they work together, etc. So the way we get to that, and people are often surprised when I talk about a mediation, about how long it can take, because we invested, if it's a mediation between two people, we will put a day aside for that mediation. Now, that bear in mind, that's when it's gone so badly that they're having to call in an external mediator. But what we do is we invest a lot of time in getting to know the people and getting to know what's behind the issue rather than what's on the face of the issue. Because in a grievance, normally, whatever is being written in the grievance is not the real issue.
When it's come to a head, people have got to the point, is that going back to your point about it's not being nipped in the bud, it's gone out of control?
Yeah, I've got a case on at the moment that's involving sex, race, disability, discrimination, various unfair treatments and things. That's what the grievance is about. The actual issue is none of those things. It's actually about something different, and that's because we've had those conversations about getting to know the person. And one important thing about mediation is it's very, very confidential, and we do it on a without prejudice basis. So the conversations that we have privately are not necessarily all shared with the other party, because you want to really understand what the issue is. So a lot of the skills of a mediator is building up that trust.
Definitely.
It all comes down to trust and relationships in the workplace. And you've got to do that as a mediator as well, because if you don't build that trust and that relationship with the people, then you're not going to get everything out of them. Therefore, you're not going to get to the root of the issues.
It strikes me that there's a bit of a vocational aspect in this. I mean, you come over you come over as very empathic, and I think that must be incredibly important in the role that you're in. You know, to build trust quickly. That's the key to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, just on that, it's fairly regular that I will, after half an hour, know things about an employee that their manager, who's managed them for 10 years, didn't know.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, that's typical of some of the, you know, and in most of those cases, the root cause is usually the leader, and they've been, you know, they've probably been promoted into that role because they're good technically and not great with people. So they do need some help from a leadership perspective, etc. But yeah, it is all about that empathy, and because I always say to people that they're always worried about, am I on their side? And I always say, yes, I am, but I'm on the other person's side as well. And it's not about that judgment. It's about facilitating those people because there is a solution out there. My strap line on the business is there's always a solution with a touch of pragmatism, and it is so true. But if you are a black and white, well, the policy says this type person, a lot of lawyers train as mediators, and in my view don't make great mediators, because they will jump to what clause 3.1.4 says in a policy. And that's not what, you know, you leave that for the judge or the grievance or whatever. They can decide who's right or wrong. This is about getting people to understand each other's perspectives and just working together on reaching a solution.
So you've got to be an excellent listener, really empathic, good at building trust, and obviously be trustworthy, and be able to operate in shades of grey. So I think also, you know, lawyers, they have to kind of be black or white. You've got to be decisive, it's right or wrong, whereas actually coming up with something which you don't know what shade of grey that person wants, and it might not even be the one that you choose, but it's finding that solution that fits into it in a pragmatic way.
Yeah. And sometimes mediations, you know, most of the time in commercial mediations, the lawyers are involved anyway. Most of the times in employment, they're not, but sometimes they are, or you're working with them in the background as well, because it's good to have those conversations. You know, you know what it's like. It's always like, oh, well, you know, my lawyers told me I'll definitely win. And then I'm saying, right, okay, great. Get that in writing from them, because I'm not sure they'll give you that. But to be able to have that conversation with the lawyers as well is sometimes useful. But again, that's when things have gone, you know, quite badly, and usually have been going on for months and years. If you can nip it in the bud, as soon as people often ask me the question, is it too early to mediate? And the answer always is, it's never too early. It's sometimes too late. So the time it's too late is the minute after the judge has made his or her decision. But any time in between, mediation is fine, because again, all it is, and sometimes, you know, when you're doing internal mediation, you don't brand it as mediation. You're just saying, let's get together, let's have a chat. You know, let you talk to me and you talk to me. Let's see if I can help you sort it out.
Yeah.
You don't have to put the whole, if it's a very low issue and you can see something is bubbling, you're just helping people to have a chat and work things through.
And actually, that's really interesting, because I was just thinking about a few years ago when I kind of thinking about it, I had to mediate between a couple of members of staff, and ish, but they were both in the same room as I was there, so it's trying to get them to listen to each other. But I think sometimes, I mean, how often do you do it in the same room where, or both parties and yourself are there, or do you listen to each of them independently first? Is there a process?
Yes, there is, very much so. And to be honest, I mean, our mediation training is slightly different to what you would get on most mediation, because most mediation training would say put people in a room together to start with. I don't do that. I never have done it, and I never will do it. And the reason for that is I often get called because somebody will say, I've tried to mediate with these people and it just made it worse. I got them in a room together, banged their heads together or whatever, and got them to say what they think, and one walked out. And I always say to them, well, I'm not surprised. And that's why I don't throw people in a room together to start with, because why make it worse before you try and make it better?
I can see that, definitely. And people are not always truthful either in that bit.
No, exactly. And a key part, as you said, is you need to be a good listener. And if you're in dispute with somebody, first of all, your heart will be racing. You won't be thinking about what that person's saying. As they're talking, at best, you'll be practicing what you're going to say to tell them why they're wrong. So a lot of, and many HR professionals will know about active listening and things like that. And it's so important in mediation, because that's when you are getting people to understand about perspectives. You won't do that by just throwing people into a room. So the process, in very simple terms, is that I have on an external mediation, I have an external call with them before the mediation. And this is all part of the building the relationship. So, and usually it takes an hour. So I will have a call with each party, and there might be 5 parties involved in a mediation. So I will have an hour with each person. And the main reason for that is to make sure that they're not worried about the process, to answer any questions they've got. And I will have sent them Q&As beforehand. But mainly it's to start to get to know them, and for them to get to know me, to start building that trust of this person that's going to help them with their issue. But on the mediation itself, I very much start separately, and no 2 mediations are the same. But if I took an average mediation, I would say that half of the day is spent separately, because what I'm doing is I'm facilitating a conversation between those 2 people, and with permissions and things to share and various things. And there's various tools and techniques and things that we use to maximize that confidential conversation. But I want them to have a really honest, open, difficult conversation with each other, but they're not in the same room. Because what I'm looking to do is bring them together at the right point. And that's when it's more about future thinking and how they're going to work together, et cetera, et cetera. And the ideal outcome of a mediation for me, and I know Actus and a lot of mediators will say there's no outcome of a mediation. I don't agree with that at all. I think the ideal outcome of a mediation, which most do get to, is a written agreement. And I say agreement with a small a, not something that they sign, but an agreed wording that is about how they're going to work going forward. And I describe that as the platform for building trust. We're not miracle workers. They're not going to be best friends and trust each other implicitly after that mediation. Yeah. But if they can get that platform for trust, it's then
principles, agreed.
And sometimes it's very simple things like, the next time I'm hacked off with you, I'm not going to send you an email. I'm going to talk to you. Let's have a coffee. It's not complex stuff often.
So again, you've gone back to the things that have caused it in the first place, and let's not let this get out of control again and just snip things in the bud.
Yeah, I have to tell you about a classic case, which was two managers in London who were friends, and one was on lunch, and during lunch, one of the friends had read a leadership book and put it on their friend's desk with a post-it note saying, I think you should read this. Something happened during lunchtime, which meant the other manager wasn't in the best of moods and read the post-it, so dropped his friend, or probably wasn't a friend by then, an email, a rocket of an email to say, who do you think you are? You think the best manager in the world, called him patronizing, horrible email. So he got one back. He got the same. They put grievances in against each other. One of them then went off with stress. had quite a, not all because of this, but it was a big contributor, but had a nervous breakdown, various things, the usual stuff. And by the time I was involved, it was almost 2 years after the book was left on the desk. After the mediation, and this was 2 men, they were crying, they were hugging, and they were apologizing for all the stress they put each other through for almost 2 years, because the intent was, this is a great book, mate. Why don't you borrow it? I'm lending you my book. And it was, and you see that a lot. And you're just like, well, if somebody could have just helped them to have that conversation after the first email or the first email exchange, they'd have had that conversation then, and they'd have saved so much stress, and
it's almost like a pride thing, isn't it? If just one of them had said, oh, thanks very much, or even, what you're trying to say with a bit of, I know that's not necessarily good, is it? Banter can actually be a negative in these sort of things as well, but
it can, and I describe it as positions versus interests. Once those emails happen and grievances happen, people take positions. What we do in mediation, which is why you've got to be such a good listener, is you get into the interests. And I don't mean flower arranging and things. I mean, what's the, that question we ask in grievances, what do you see as the resolution? What do you see as the outcome? It's that type of stuff, but really exploring it. And that's where you get the resolutions. It's not what's written in the emails or the grievances.
Oh, so I'm going to know what the book was. That's just a random piece of knowledge, actually.
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember what the actual book was. Apparently, it was
answers on a postcard. Any listener, what might be the book that would really wind people up, or something like that? And I'm not sure. It was just, and I'm sure it was just curious. But before we go on to some tips and etc. for anyone listening that they can maybe take away, and obviously how they can engage if they want training or your services. I'm interested, just to go back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier, see if there are certain themes in organisations that repetitively cause problems. And one of the things you mentioned, which I thought was interesting, knowing that we both talked about businesses that we've worked for before, and one big businesses I've worked for that this resonated with, is the classic thing where a technical manager is or an engineer or someone who's actually not at all interested in people is promoted into a people manager role, and therefore they don't really do people management. So that is a kind of classic root cause at an organizational level. What other ones do you see that maybe as HR professionals we could think about preventing some of this?
I think that's the biggest one. I think the other thing is a lot of managers who probably have got that capability, because I think the first population you talked about, probably it's a bit of a DNA thing. So how much development they have, it still might not make the difference. But
they don't have the people gene full stop, let alone training.
Yeah, exactly. Keep them in front of their spreadsheets and things, and don't let them loose on people. But there are as well a lot of potentially great leaders, but almost organisations seem to have a view that because they've signed a contract to say they're now a manager, suddenly they should be a really good leader. And we all know the difference between being a manager and a leader. And it, sometimes people are very natural at it. Sometimes they're not. And they just need that little bit of help, coaching, whatever. And they need, that's where, for me, the HR function, has immense value to help those leaders to work through these issues and prevent a lot of the stuff I have to get involved in. But to become, when we talk about employee relations and employee engagement, it's easy to say, but it's, it takes some doing. And sometimes those leaders just need the confidence to lead people. So I think training has its role. But as we all know, you probably learn more from people, coaching, mentoring, that type of thing. But to really support those leaders, those managers in becoming leaders, takes time and effort.
It's interesting though, the concept of leader, because I actually think the management skill of, we were talking off camera or off audio earlier, won't it be, about that management skill of having honest conversations, just having regular honest conversations is often one of the one that's lacking the most in terms of where people can come issues. What you were talking about, your no surprises mantra. Talk a bit about that one.
Well, I mean, you mentioned it first, and it was great that we both have the same mantra of no surprises, and I've always found it so true. And you look at performance management, things like that, and I don't know what the percentage of disputes I get involved in that involves performance ratings and all this lot, but it's pretty high.
Is it? I was going to say, are the regular themes? So people dispute the fact that they've been given a rating or whatever, and then
and not only do they dispute it, they then see it as bullying and victimization and all this stuff, and that's where, for me, that's the difference between mediation and things like grievances, because I can have really honest conversations with them about, okay, my first job, I didn't mention this to you, but I was actually bullied in my first job because I left school at 16. I was a trainee dental technician making false teeth. That's another story. but my boss used to physically hit me and twice almost knocked me out. So I know that I was bullied in my
That's
first
more than
job.
bullying, gosh.
Yeah. But it's pretty serious bullying. So I'm able to have those conversations with somebody, and I'll say to them, I know that was bullying. Now, I'd have given my background to them when I first met them as part of that relationship building. So when they say I'm being bullied because of my PDR rating, I can say, right, I know that when my manager almost knocked me out, I know that was bullying. Let's talk about whether a PDR rating that's not what you expected, whether that's bullying or whether it's not.
Yeah.
and you can have those really honest conversations. But performance management is, but the root cause, when you look at it, is usually there's a company has got a process, and it's once or twice a year they fill a form in about performance rating, and people who have a surprise that gets a performance rating that's higher than they expected, usually they won't raise a dispute about that. It'll be a nice surprise, but often it's the other way, and that's when things happen. And I always say to them, well, no surprises. It shouldn't be a surprise. You should be having those conversations weekly, monthly, whatever it is. But, and not just how are they doing? How are you doing as a manager? It's all that coaching that
two-way conversation
really is required.
Continuous conversations. That is absolutely it in terms, but not just conversations, tactical conversations. Actually, giving people the opportunity, being honest, giving honest feedback, and not shying away from it. And I think we're doing loads of training on that here as well ourselves. I think with the remote working, people are realizing that that's more important to do and prevent this. I think we could go into culture, but I'm going to steer clear of that because of the whole grievances and things like that, because we've hit our time or close to it. But just if you've got a few takeaways for any HR professionals listening, if they've got an issue, is there anything you would recommend or say when you bring in a mediator, when they should mediate themselves, anything like that you suggest or that would help?
My view would be, I suppose I go back to my experience in my HR. I saw being trained as a mediator as a real launchpad for my HR career, and I did okay. I was in some fairly senior roles in companies like British Steel and Rolls-Royce and things. And the reason I did pretty well was I tended to get moved towards, you seem to be able to sort this issue out.
Yeah, become a problem solver.
Can you sort it? And so my view, ironically, is almost don't feel you have the need to call me in or somebody like me as a mediator, because actually probably 80-90% of the issues you could actually help right at that starting point. And that's what I did. One organization I joined had 12 grievances per week, 600 grievances a year. It was just mad. It was crazy. It took 3 years, but we went to one grievance in 15 months. And it wasn't that the issues went away, it was how we dealt with the issues. And so for me, my one takeaway would be, if you're a HR professional, you've got a certain set of skills anyway. And to get that extra string to your bow of being able to mediate is immensely powerful. So that's why we do the mediation training, to help people. And it is mainly HR, but it's also managers as well, to help people to just be able to get in the middle of these issues and avoid those horrible formal grievances.
I might get you to tell me a little bit more about that mediation training, because I think it might be useful for people to also what's involved. But just briefly, because I just have worked with an organisation where they've had that sort of grievance culture, and in terms of, in a nutshell, how did you get it from however many you said a week
12
to
a week?
Yeah,
so
what did you do?
in that organisation, it was very heavily trade unionised, and they were one of the influencers for all the grievances. So what I did was I agreed with, because they did agree that we needed to avoid formal grievances if we could. So I trained my HR team in mediation, and I put myself almost as an escalation in the mediation process. So if they couldn't help the people to resolve it, it then came to me, and I then and very few did, because they sorted them out. The few that came to me, I sorted most of those out. There was one that I couldn't sort out. And I always say that I class formal grievances as a failure. It's either a failure of the company to sort things out informally, or sometimes it's a failure of an individual to have any sense of rationale. This one that got through was one in the latter. He insisted I was going to make him redundant. He threatened to take us to court for making him keep his job. I offered to pay for a lawyer of his own choice and things like you do on a settlement agreement. And he said no. He put in a formal grievance. It took 20 minutes and he retired instead. He didn't take us to court, but it was a formal grievance.
Right, fair enough. Okay, so that sounds like quite a result. So that actually does lead. So just briefly, because I know you do mediator training. So what would be involved in mediator training if people wanted to do that?
So the mediation training we do, so I suppose it's twofold. We do a course in Nottingham that's based at Eastwood Hall in Nottingham. So nice food and all this.
Nice place.
It's 3 days. And the other way that we do it is we can go to, if organisations have got sufficient numbers, we go to their organisation, deliver it in-house. It's exactly the same training, but it basically consists of some theory. As much as I don't like theories, it's important. So we do the theories, but more importantly, we build the practical cases and real life stories and interaction around those real life cases. And we talk and we give people the skill set to be a mediator, how to do a mediation, what happens when people reach an impasse, different negotiation techniques and things like that to get people to maximize the opportunity of reaching that solution. So it's myself and another mediator, Charlotte, who's also a CIPD lecturer and things like that. So she's, a great trainer and things, but also a very good mediator. Brilliant. And we do that between us. And it's 3 days of us just trying to help people to explore all that and just avoid those grievances. It's just, I don't think anybody enjoys grievances.
No, absolutely. So thank you so much, Pete, for coming on and telling us all about mediation. If people want to reach out to you, get in touch with you personally, and I'm sure you can link into Charlotte. Do you want to just tell everybody, obviously I'll put, as usual, on the hruprising.com show notes, I'll put links. How do they get hold of you if they want to get directly in touch? So
LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So
that's how I found you.
Yeah, absolutely. Colby. My email address is pete@pragmatism-uk.co.uk. The website is pragmatism-uk.co.uk. I can give my mobile number if you want me to.
No, don't do that. I'm sure I can find you digitally, and that would be great. But I've thoroughly enjoyed listening and learning from you there, Pete, and I can see why you do a great job. So thank you so much for coming on the HR Uprising.
No, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the chat.
Me too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising, proudly brought to you by Actus Software, the joined-up performance and talent management solution. You can access links to any of the information or resources mentioned in the show via the podcast page at www.hruprising.com. If you like what we do, please subscribe, tell your colleagues, and leave a review. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising.